The biography of Elon Musk that was written by Walter Isaacson came out a few years ago. It's 615 pages long, and so I read the book for the first time when it came out, and I didn't think I could make a great episode about it, and I think I've now finally figured out what I really want to talk to you about. It's going to sound crazy because Elon is the richest person on the planet and the most famous entrepreneur alive. But I think that all of the other stuff, the politics, the tweets, the constant appearance in the news, or there's new controversies all the time, it just really distracts and takes away from the fact that Elon has a set of timeless and brilliant and insanely valuable principles on how to build companies, how to invent new technology, and how to make an impact on the world around you. And so this is what I did. I have spent at least 60 hours reading and rereading this book. This book is written in chronological order. So I would say it's more akin to reading a series of news reports over a few decades than the typical way a biography is written. And so, as it turns out, that's going to be a major asset for you and I, because what you'll see, and what I exclusively want to focus on, is the enduring set of company building principles Elon has used over 3 decades and across at least 7 companies. So it may be apocryphal, but there is a quote from Michelangelo when he was asked how he created the statue of David, and he replied, "I just chipped away everything that was not David." So what I've done is edited down my 40 pages of notes and highlights from the book into just the way that Elon works. I want to focus on the ideas that he used to build his companies and to build what I think is a truly singular career. I don't think there's anyone else like him, living or dead. And so I'm going to go through his ideas in chronological order so you can see how they appear, reappear, and how they are edited and iterated on over time. And so at the end of the episode, or by the end of episode, I should say, it will be impossible for you not to understand how Elon works. And then what I think we both should do is we should sit with these ideas, write them down, and then think deeply about how we can apply some of them to our work. I think one of the superpowers of this project that has been going on for almost a decade, where you and I get together every week and we talk about another one of history's greatest founders, is that we see that somehow people that didn't know each other were alive at different points in history, worked in different industries, lived in different parts of the world, all arrived at very similar conclusions on how to build themselves and their company into something great. So I want to start when Elon's in college, right before he starts his first company, Zip2. This is something that's mentioned. Every single thing I'm going to tell you is repeated over and over again. This is why I think they're so powerful. So one thing that's repeated over and over again is the fact that Elon loves strategy games, whether they're board games or they're video games. In this case, in college, he was obsessed with this board game, this classic strategy board game called Diplomacy. And it says that immersing himself in these games for hours became the way he relaxed, escaped stress, and honed his tactical skills and strategic thinking for business. He was drawn to these games from an early age. When he was asked why, he told one of his friends, "I am wired for war." That sentence, "I am wired for war," Elon will repeat across decades. When he was in his early 20s, he had an internship says Elon did not like, nor was he good at working for other people. It was not in his nature to be differential or to assume that others might know more than he did. Again, he was like this in his early 20s. He's still like that today when they start Zip2. One of the things that he repeats over and over again is the importance of being hardcore, of working every single waking hour. When they started Zip2, they slept in the office and showered at the YMCA. Another one of Elon's core principles, this is the way I describe it, this is not the way he describes it, is that Elon understands that showmanship is salesmanship. So they would bring people into the Zip2 office. It says they bought a big frame for a computer rack and put one of their small computers inside so that visitors would think they had a giant server. Every time investors would come in, we showed them that tower. It made them think we were doing hardcore stuff. You will see him use that over and over again. Elon understands the power of one dramatic demonstration. From the very beginning of his career, Elon was a demanding manager, contemptuous of the concept of work-life balance. He drove himself relentlessly all day and night without vacations, and he expected others to do the same. His only indulgence was allowing breaks for intense video game binges. That's a description of Elon in his 20s. I don't think he can be any other way. One thing he says when he's building Zip2 and uses it for the rest of his life, he is not a fan of camaraderie or being overly collegial with the people you work with. He says over and over again, doing so is both counterproductive and dangerous, and that it gets in the way of actually putting the mission first. So he says he genuinely did not care if he offended or intimidated the people he worked with as long as he drove them to accomplish feats that they thought were impossible. It's not your job to make people on your team love you. He would say years later at a SpaceX executive session, in fact, that's counterproductive. One thing that he did not like early in his career, and he never likes, he hates middlemen. A good way to think about Elon is Elon wants full control over everything always. True product people have a compulsion to sell directly to consumers without middlemen mudding things up. Elon was that way. Less than 4 years after starting Zip2, Elon and his brother, they went up selling the company to Compaq Computer. Compaq bought it for $37 million in cash. So by the time Elon was 27 years old, he had $22 million from the sale of his company. And what's fascinating is there's all these interviews he was doing when he was 27. And we see that it's not the money that's the motivator. The true sense of satisfaction, the true sense of accomplishment is building a real company. And so he says, I could go buy an island, but I'm much more interested in trying to build and create a new company. I haven't spent all of my winnings. I'm going to put almost all of it back into a new game. He said the real payoff is the sense of satisfaction in having created a company. And so this is the note I left after I read the book, and I go back and I reread my highlights and notes compulsively before I sit down and talk to you. And so this is what I said: make money and put it back into another company. That is a trait of his that he repeats for decades. More than 20 years later, when he had a bunch of cash from selling Tesla stock, he put it into Twitter. He hates having money just sitting there. And so that's a theme that's going to reappear over and over again, is the fact that the money is for putting it into a company and solving a problem. What interested him was the problems that he wanted to solve. And he was willing to have an insanely high risk tolerance even when he was younger, because he said, I'm either going to be wealthy or broke, but it's not going to be anything in between. And so another enduring principle of Elon that he uses throughout his career is the fact that belief is irresistible. You will hear quotes like this across decades from different companies, from all kinds of different people that knew Elon. Even when it seemed like crazy talk, you would believe him because he believed it. Elon has the ability to transfer his belief to other people. He is contemptuous of work-life balance. His management style has not changed from Zip2, nor would it ever. I am by nature obsessive compulsive, Elon said. What matters to me is winning, and not in a small way. So Elon starts his next company, and it's the exact same management style that he had at his first company, and he will have forever. One of Elon's management tactics was to set an insane deadline and drive colleagues to meet it. Elon slept under his desk most nights. Elon is intense in all things. This is a description of him when he's playing video games. He was sweating, and you can see that he has a bundle of energy and intensity. One of the most shocking things of this book, especially if you eliminate everything that's not how Elon works, is Elon's obsession with simplification and deleting. Half the book is him just yelling at people to delete, to edit, and to simplify. He does this relentlessly. He had a passion for simplicity when it came to designing user interfaces. I honed the user interface to get the fewest numbers of keystrokes to open an account. Elon said one of the conflicts he had with his co-founders of PayPal was the fact that he was not interested in making niche products. And you see a drastic difference in the size of his ambition after selling PayPal. Says it was not in Elon's nature to make niche products. He wants to remake entire industries. We are 79 pages into this book, and you will see one of his most repeated principles. He has to mention this. I don't know 25 times for the rest of the book. Elon restructured the company so that there was not a separate engineering department. Instead, engineers would team up with project managers. It was a philosophy that he would carry through to Tesla, SpaceX, and Twitter. Separating the design of a product from its engineering was a recipe for dysfunction. Designers had to feel the immediate pain if something they devised was hard to engineer. Engineers rather than product managers should lead the team. One of my favorite maxims from the history of entrepreneurship is that if you know your business from A to Z, there's no problem you can't solve. Over and over again, starting with PayPal and all the way up until present day, people are shocked at how much detail Elon knows about their area of the company. So we have one of his co-founders, Max Lovchin, back in the PayPal days were saying, Elon will say crazy stuff, but every once in a while, he'll surprise you by knowing way more than you do about your own specialty. I think a huge part of the way he motivates people are these displays of sharpness. Another principle that he identified, in my opinion, very correctly from a young age is the fact that the CEO, the founder, should be the public face of the company, and that he really believed he was the best spokesperson for his company. Here's a collection of descriptions of Elon when he was building PayPal. The reason I include this is because Elon is still like this 3 decades later, and you will have people in all his other companies say the exact same thing about him. He has a relentless and rough personal style. He has a desire to take risks. He was into amplifying risk and burning the boats so that we could never retreat from it. He has a level of certainty that causes him to put all of his chips on the table. And then what I would say is they talked about the fact that he got kicked out of PayPal as CEO. He does something really smart, which I'll get to later, which he doesn't destroy the relationships with his co-founders, which actually winds up saving SpaceX about a decade later. But I think it's very obvious and it's very to use for the rest of his career. He names things really well too. He calls this the idiot index. So it says Elon employed first principles thinking, drilling down to the basic physics of the situation and building up from there. That is, again, something you and I are going to talk about 100 times today. This led him to develop what he called an idiot index, which calculated how much more costly a finished product was than the cost of its basic materials. If a product had a high idiot index, its cost could be reduced significantly by devising more efficient manufacturing techniques. Rockets had an extremely high idiot index. Elon B calculating the cost of carbon fiber, metal, fuel, and other materials that went into them. The finished product using the current manufacturing methods costs at least 50 times more than that. The word cost appears 158 times in this book. Elon is obsessed with controlling costs. I have a note to myself from later in the book that says he surrounded himself with biographies. Of course, he's obsessed with cost control. There are many examples in other books that I've read on Elon obsessively reading biographies. This is something that he has in common with all of history's greatest entrepreneurs, from Elon today all the way to Carnegie and Rockefeller and everyone in between. If you are great, you stay in the details on cost. That is why Ramp is the presenting sponsor of this podcast. I've gotten to know all the co-founders of Ramp and have spent a ton of time with them over the last 2 years. They all listen to the podcast and they've picked up on the fact the main theme from the podcast is on the importance of watching your costs and controlling your spend, and how doing so will give you a massive competitive advantage. You're going to see this with Elon's companies over and over and over again as we keep going through this book. One of my favorite ways to illustrate this and why it's so important is actually from a biography of Andrew Carnegie, who, keep in mind, when Carnegie sold his company to JP Morgan, Carnegie had the world's largest liquid fortune. And so the quote from his biography says Carnegie would repeat this mantra time and time again. Elon, as you'll see today, he repeats mantras again and again and again. I'm like screaming about this. I'm telling you, if Carnegie says this, if Elon says this, it's like a bright flashing red light to you and I. Hey, this is probably a good idea. This is Carnegie's mantra. Profits and prices are cyclical, subject to any number of transient forces of the marketplace. Costs, however, could be strictly controlled, and any savings achieved in the costs of goods were permanent. Cost control became nearly an obsession for Andrew Carnegie. It is an obsession with Elon too, and that is a main theme for Ramp. The reason that Ramp exists is to give you everything you need to control your spend. RAM gives you everything you need to control your cost. RAM gives you easy-to-use corporate cards for your entire team, automated expense reporting, bill payments, accounting, and cost control. And they do this on a single platform. The greats all study the greats. And the easiest way to study the greats today is by listening to founders. So many of the top founders and CEOs listen to founders, and I hear from them all the time. Most of the excellent operators I know run their business on Ramp. If you're not running your business yet on Ramp, you should be. Make history's greatest entrepreneurs proud by going to ramp.com to learn how they can help your business today. That is ramp.com. Now back to a principle that Elon repeats a lot. In laying out the factory, Elon followed his philosophy that the design, engineering, and manufacturing teams would all be clustered together. The people on the assembly line should be able to immediately collar a designer or engineer and say, "Why the how did you make it this way?" Elon explained, "This is really brilliant what he's about to say. It's like a simple genius. If your hand is on a stove and it gets hot, you pull it right off. But if it's someone else's hand on the stove, it will take you longer to do something." And so he will constantly repeat, you cannot separate design, engineering, and manufacturing. They need to be together because you are going to make mistakes. And you want to identify and fix those mistakes today, right now. And if you separate them, the mistakes will fester. There's a term that's used in the book that says Elon likes fresh blood. He will churn through people rapidly. If you were negative or thought something couldn't be done, you would not be invited to the next meeting. In many cases, you were fired. He wanted people who would make things happen. On to the next highlight. Elon was laser focused on keeping costs down. Cost effectiveness was critical. He challenged the prices that aerospace suppliers charged for components, which were usually 10 times higher than similar parts in the auto industry. He'll constantly go back, what is the idiot index on this? He'll drill into you in meetings if you don't know. His focus on cost as well as his natural controlling instincts led him to want to manufacture as many components as possible in-house. Remember, Elon wants control over everything always, rather than buy them from suppliers, which was then the standard practice in the rocket and car industries. He does not give a damn what the standard practice is of any industry. He will constantly challenge himself and other people around him. Go down to first principles thinking. Here's an example of the idiot index. A supplier quoted a price of $120,000. Elon said that the part was no more complicated than a garage door opener and told one of his engineers to make the part. His engineer made it and it only cost $5,000. This directly leads into another one of his most repeated principles and one thing that he repeats over and over again. You need to question every single requirement. He probably says that 25 times in the book. He made his engineers question all specifications. This would later become step 1 in a 5-point checklist dubbed the algorithm that became an oft-repeated mantra when developing products. Whenever one of his engineers cited a requirement as a reason for doing something, Elon would grill them. Who made the requirement? And answering the military or the legal department was not good enough. This is brilliant. Elon would insist that they know the name of the actual person who made the requirement. All requirements should be treated as recommendations. Elon repeatedly instructed. The only immutable ones were those decreed by the laws of physics. He said another one of his core operating principles that he will repeat over and over again is that a maniacal sense of urgency is our operating principle. A maniacal sense of urgency is our operating principle. Here's an example of that. How in the Trark scene can it take so long? Elon asked. This is stupid. Cut it in half. Mueller balked. You can't just take a schedule that we already cut in half and then cut it in half again. Elon looked at him coldly and told him to stay behind after the meeting. He then asked Mueller whether he wanted to remain in charge of engines. When Mueller said yes, Elon replied, then when I ask for something, you, say, give it to me. Half of this book is Elon telling people to go faster. This is why he does this. Even though we failed to meet most schedules or cost targets that Elon laid out, we still beat all of our peers. Mueller admits that is the result of having a maniacal sense of urgency as your operating principle. Another thing he repeats to everybody around him, he expects you to know all the details of your part of the business and he will erupt in anger if you don't. Elon would pepper them with technical questions. He would erupt with searing fury when an engineer did not know an answer. He considered himself a frontline general. He will repeat over and over again how important it is to be a frontline general. He's on the factory floor. He's climbing on top of roofs. He's underneath rockets. And so as a result that he's constantly there talking directly to the people doing work. says Elon's willingness to work all night at the factory pursuing innovations inspired his engineers. Another thing that's important to understand and repeat is Elon wants total control all the time, always. He does not like partnering with other companies. He will churn through people. There is an exception to this. Says Elon does not naturally partner with people. Collegiality was not part of his skill set and difference not in his nature. He does not like to share power. One of the few exceptions was his relationship with Gwynne Shotwell. She has worked with Elon for more than 20 years, longer than anyone else. And so she has a bunch of advice on how do you actually work with people like this. He says Shotwell thought the team was clueless. This is when she first met Elon. Shotwell thought the team was clueless about how to sell services. The guy you have doing discussions with possible customers is a loser, she told Elon bluntly. The next day, she got a call asking her to be vice president of business development. This is very obvious if you read a bunch of books on Elon. Also pops out in a bunch of books on Steve Jobs. I would say the principle applies across when you're dealing with these maniacal people like this. The worst thing you could do is knuckle under. The worst thing you could do is back down. They only respect strength. And over time, as they become more powerful and more famous, very few people actually tell them the truth. And so what Gwen did there was perfect. He's like, no, this guy's a loser, and here's why I could do this better. And then at the very beginning of Tesla, we see the exact same idea used over and over again. Again, this is repeated over decades. Elon focused on the importance of the mission rather than the potential of the business. Here's an example of his obsession with cost control and with control in general. One of the most important decisions that Elon made about Tesla was that it should make its own key components rather than piecing together a car with hundreds of components from independent suppliers. Tesla would control its own destiny and quality and costs and supply chain by being vertically integrated. Creating a good car was important. Even more important was crafting the manufacturing processes and factories that could mass reduce them from the battery cells to the body. In the early days of the industry, Henry Ford and other pioneer car makers did most of the work in-house. When I got to the section, the note I left myself is Ford was so obsessed with control, he owned a Ox railroad. And he did that so he could ensure all the source materials that he needed for his car, which he also owned, got to him when he wanted them. And so that's the way the industry starts. Then in America deviates, and they wonder why the quality falls off a cliff. And then 50 years later, you have Elon start another car company. He's like, no, I'm just going to go back and control everything. This is one of the things I personally admire most about Elon. He's anti-outsourcing, and over the following pages are just a few lines that give you an idea why he has to be this way. It is in his nature. Elon had to have ultimate authority. It was not in his nature to defer. Few pages later, he could not refrain from getting involved in design and engineering decisions. Now, one area that Elon is very different from most of the people that you and I study is the fact that he's running all these comp companies simultaneously. Usually the people you and I talk about are focused inside one company. Now, what I realized is one of the benefits of running multiple companies simultaneously is this transfer of ideas and lessons learned in one to other ones. And so I'm going to bring that to your attention a few times today. So to hopefully two for that lesson to like really stick in your brain. But here's the first example. Over the years, Elon was able to use techniques learned at SpaceX and apply them to Tesla and vice versa. When Eberhard pushed back on the cost of carbon fiber, this is at Tesla. Elon sent him an email. Dude, you could make the body panels for at least 500 cars per year if you bought the soft oven we have at SpaceX. If someone tells you this is hard, they are full of visik or rihak. Let's go to one trait of his that ties everything together. This guy's got superhuman levels of determination, and there's just the only way to that he's ever going to quit is when he dies. And what's fascinating is even people that made money off of him in the past still underestimated his level of dedication. And so he's pitching Michael Murata's at Sequoia to invest in Tesla, even though they made a bunch of money in PayPal. And so Moritz calls Elon. He's like, hey, I'm not going to invest. We're not going to compete against Toyota. That is mission impossible. Years later, Moritz conceded, I didn't appreciate the strength of Elon's determination. Another principle I've already mentioned once, it's over and over again in the book. The maxim I have on this is showmanship is salesmanship. Elon had an enthusiastic attraction to publicity. Elon believed an important element in launching a new product is an event. So they're building the very first Tesla Roadster. I think they only made like 200 of these things. When the prototype Roadster was ready, Elon put on the event. And then this also ties in the fact that he's a showman, but he's obsessed with details. All of his ideas you'll see he uses over and over again, but they interact well with each other. This is the magic. So when the event for the prototype Roadster was being planned, Elon planned the event. Elon personally took over planning the event. If it's, I guess what I'm trying to tell you here is if it's important, he's doing it. Elon personally took over planning the event. He oversaw the guest list, chose the menu, and even approved the cost and design of the napkins. Another thing that's repeated over and over again in the book by Elon is the importance of making sure that you have failures. He says something later on. He's like, yeah, your first 50 failures are going to be really painful and they're going to really hurt. But eventually over time, you're less emotional. And if you're less emotional, you could take more calculated risks. What I would say is one of the most important things about this book is the book is full of Elon making decisions that he'll come to regret later. That is inevitable if you're trying to succeed at anything, especially if you're trying to innovate and create something new. And then I think one of the most important concepts of this book that, really sat in my mind after is like, oh, the people that succeed the most also have the most failures. And part of what makes him most successful and also fail a lot is the fact that he doesn't have any patience. It's a virtue that he lacks. And so he's talking about the fact that they tried to build and launch the first SpaceX rockets from this remote island called Quaz. And he says Elon would later admit that moving to Quash was a mistake. He should have waited for Vandenberg to become available. But that would have required patience. And that's a virtue he lacked. This is what Elon said. Every now and then, you shoot yourself in the foot. If you had to pick a path that reduced the probability of success, it would be to launch from an inaccessible tropical island. And so then they tell a story about just how difficult it was because of this remote location just to get the supplies they needed for the rockets there. And so this is a great little story. Don't worry about remembering the names in the story. The capacitors were available in an electronic supply house in Minnesota. So an intern in that was in Texas was dispatched there. So send the intern from Texas to Minneapolis to pick that up, right? Meanwhile, Altian removed the power boxes from the rocket on Omalch, which is this island in the Pacific, jumped on a boat to Quaj, slept on a concrete slab outside the airport, waiting for an early morning flight to Honolulu, and then made the connection to Los Angeles, and then drove to SpaceX headquarters. There he met the intern who had gone from Texas to Minnesota. Now he's in LA, who had arrived from Minnesota with the new capacitors. He swapped them into the faulty power boxes. Then he and Elon jumped into Elon's jet for the dash back to Quash. Keep in mind, at this point, SpaceX had yet to successfully launch a single rocket on the plane. Elon bombarded him with questions on every detail of the circuitry. So that part reminds me of this excerpt from the Elon biography that was written many years ago by Ashley Vance. And the way I think about this excerpt that I want to read, free users can only transcribe the first 30 minutes. Upgrade to retranscribe the full file. Transcribed by Uniscribe, https://w.uniscribe.co. Upgrade to remove this message.